Hi, my name is Bajena Barker, and the following PowerPoint presentation is my part of our Week 6 assignment. I chose the subject of neurodevelopmental conditions known as the autism spectrum disorder, and my presentation partner is Caitlin Kolva. My part of the assignment was to find a journal article relating to the autism spectrum disorder and to give an overview summary of that journal article. In addition, at the end of the presentation, I will be providing 5 national web resources for autism spectrum disorder and their families, which will help provide resources including research, family support and services, and links to national websites and organizations devoted to autism spectrum disorder known as ASD. Slide 1 is obviously my title slide of this article summary. The article I chose to read and summarize is titled Autism Spectrum Disorder and Schizophrenia. Do They Overlap? By Barletti, Desti, Ariu, and Vita. This summary is provided for our online course titled Human Behavior and Social Environment 2. Aileen McCabe instructing. Introduction. Although schizophrenia and autism spectrum disorder are now perceived as two distinct, separate neurodevelopmental disorders, this was not always the case. This article describes both the similarities and the differences of these disorders, their historic relationships to each other, the risk factors, and possible future implications for research. However, for the purpose of this article summary, I will be focusing primarily on their similarities. Let's start with the fact that the article provided a brief but intriguing history of the two disorders and how they have related to each other over time. In 1943, autism was first described as being directly related to schizophrenia, but the children diagnosed with these symptoms were actually diagnosed with schizophrenia childhood type. The article goes on to explain that as the time went on, throughout the 1960s and 1970s, autism gradually developed clearer definitions based primarily on the age of onset, family history, clinical manifestations, and overall outcomes. Now, since our course has largely revolved around the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, I thought it would be a good idea to outline the article's history of ASD as listed in the DSM. Although the initial concepts of autism were related to schizophrenia in 1943, they were barely ever referenced in the first DSM, which came out in 1952. Anyone diagnosed with symptoms of autism were actually diagnosed with having schizophrenia childhood type. This continued throughout the second edition of the DSM. But finally, in the DSM-3, 1980, autism was classified in a separate diagnostic category and was listed as autistic disorder. It wasn't until the DSM-4 was introduced in the year 2000 that autism was considered as a pervasive developmental disorder, and the diagnosis was changed to autism disorder. Finally, the DSM-5, published in 2013, autism received its first classification as a spectrum disorder, and the diagnosis was moved into the classification of neurodevelopmental disorders. Now, there are some differences, such as the fact that autism rarely exhibits psychotic symptoms until much later in life. There are strong similarities between ASD and schizophrenia, and these similarities have been found in all of the following categories: environmental risk factors, such as advanced paternal age or the father is usually older, possibly unknown early fetal injury or prenatal infection occurred, genetic risk factors. For example, both disorders have a high rate of inheritability, and it has been discovered that the same genes are associated with both disorders. Neurobiological features. Very similar cognitive impairments exist in both disorders. Brain imaging. Similar physical abnormalities in the structure of the brain have been found. Clinical features, such as 1/3 patients develop schizophrenia later in life. People with schizophrenia often show signs and symptoms of ASD, and the fact that childhood onset of schizophrenia, COS, and ASD are virtually impossible to tell apart. And social cognitive. Both disorders affect the person's ability to interact socially at a normal level, and as well as they are both affected the person's ability to control their emotions. In conclusion, the article goes on to state that further study is needed to help determine just how similar ASD and schizophrenia truly are. This research could help provide much needed answers in several areas, such as possible treatments, providing more appropriate supports and services for both disorders, and helping to determine if there are ways of possible prevention for either disorder. My only reference for this article summary has been the article itself, which was published in the International Journal of Emergency Mental Health and Human Resilience in 2015. The following are national web resources designed to help those affected by autism spectrum disorder: the Autism Society website, the Autism Speaks website, the Easter Seal Society website, the Center for Disease Control website, and the Research Autism website. Thank you.